Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the first of our Lunchbox series with Everybody's Oma. By now, I hope you've all caught up on the phenomenon that is Everybody's Oma and the videos on Facebook. We're really excited to team up with Jason and Megan for this webinar series. Working in aged care, we have a lot of residents with memory that require memory support. So obviously Alzheimer's and dementia are a cause very close to our heart. A few of us here have been following this family's story from the very beginning, so it's been really exciting to see it kind of go viral. And we even noticed that James Corden gave them a shout out on his show a few weeks ago. So we are in very prestigious company. So I'd like to welcome you both, Jason and Megan. Thank you for joining us today.
No problem.
Hey Sarah, thanks for having us, and thanks everyone for jumping on and joining the chat. It's been a fun ride.
I'm sure, and I can't wait to hear all about it. So we're going to have 3 episodes over 3 weeks, and they're going to be set in a lunchtime half hour. So hopefully everyone can join us for all of them or even one of them, but they'll all be available on our YouTube channel afterwards, so you can catch up.
Now, Sarah, I was going to check because it's a Lunchbox series, but we're not actually eating lunch. We've kind of held back.
Yeah, no, you're going to have your lunch before or after, if that's okay.
So little 2 notes. One, you're probably going to hear my stomach grumbling over the next half hour. Secondly, I just want to throw in, there's a good chance during our chat that we're going to hear an internal doorbell going off. And that's when that does happen, that's just Oma asking for help, like she needs help or she's got a question with something. So we rather than telling Oma to not interrupt us for the next half hour, we just said nothing. So if it goes off, just one of us will jump up and help Oma out and then come back. But we'll keep this rolling as tightly as we can.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so this first episode, we've called it What's Going On with Oma. So I guess we wanted to talk about what happened in the beginning, what sort of symptoms or behaviours you started to notice that made you think there was something you needed to explore a bit more. Maybe if we can start there.
Let me start there.
Yeah, well, it's something we're actually reflecting on a lot at the moment because I don't actually know why. We just seem to be talking a lot about that when we sort of first understood things were happening. So for us, I'll rewind the clock back a fair chunk of time. 10 years ago, we lost my dad to lung cancer. And when my mum and dad were living together, the whole family's energy was really consumed with his palliative care. And in the end stages of his cancer journey, that was just so all-encompassing, just trying to manage his end-of-life cycle and that manage that at home, in their family home. Megan and I pretty much moved in there, as much as we could for the last couple of weeks of his journey. And, we never really looked at Mum. I never looked at Oma. So just by way of explanation too, Oma is Dutch for grandmother. And I'll call her Mum and Oma during the course of this stuff. She's my mum, but to our kids, she's Oma. So, Oma pretty much kind of just went on with life and went on with the daily routine of what she was doing. And all of our eyes were on my dad. And then when my dad passed, we started realising that things weren't altogether the same with Mum. And without having him in her life as part of her routine to fuss over and to manage his day, meal times, the house routine, everything seemed to change, medications. Yeah, and we just noticed she was different. She was visibly different. That was the first time we noticed that there was a cognitive decline, albeit small in scale to obviously what we're living with now with Oma, but it was noticeable. And we were just keeping our eye on it. We started visiting the family GP. I went with Mum then to her GP visits. Started understanding that she wasn't really that capable of really representing herself anymore. She was getting quite forgetful with things. She was missing chunks of information, and we realised at that stage that she was going to need to lean on us a lot more than what we probably had thought. So in those early days, once my dad had passed, my mum never learned to drive either. So from an independence point of view, they had a family car, but once my dad passed, my mum couldn't even do her own shopping or couldn't go out and visit friends and socialise. So she was all dependent on other people for that. So we had a carer that would come and help with shopping trips and things during the week. And then every Friday, I took Fridays off work And every Friday I would go and dedicate a day to spending it that day with my mum every week. And that would usually mean, going to the chemist or doctor visits, or going to the local club where we'd have lunch together, and then she'd have a little fling on the poker machines. And that we got by with that for a long time. And then
we really started.
It escalated. We could recognise that it wasn't actually, it wasn't safe for her to be on her own anymore.
And we were living an hour apart as well, so it wasn't as if she was hugely accessible. We couldn't just pop over. Like, it was,
So if she had a fall, she started having mechanical falls. So started tripping on things in the house. Those little silly, stupid things that can almost go by unnoticed at the start of a journey like this, where you just excuse it to I just didn't see it, or my glasses weren't on, or whatever. But then they started compacting together and becoming more frequent, and the falls became a bit more substantial. There was big hematomas and lumps and bruises and skin cuts and things and tears. So when those things start happening, you really feel that distance of being an hour away from your parent. And, that's an hour trip. And I remember at one point when I got a phone call at 3 a.m. to come out and help, I managed to do that trip in just under half an hour. So it wasn't safe for all of us to be, having that distance between us. And it was going to take its toll somewhere along the line. So, we at a point decided, we started already looking for a place with a granny flat attached to it, some accommodation that if we did want to move Oma in with us, that we could. And we fortunately found a place which had a granny flat attached.
And when we did sort of start discussing it with her, she was never opposed to it. She was actually always quite excited about the prospect of living with us all.
And I think that's the funny thing.
Which made it easy,
Yeah, we all, I think too often we approach this, and whether that's having your loved one going into care, or whether that's elevating their level of care in the home environment, I think as carers, you always kind of think that there's going to be a real pushback and a real resistance to that automatically by default. And we certainly thought that. And in Oma's case, it was just discussed by another family friend over lunch. And then she responded to that really favourably, said, "Oh, look, I'd love to one day, move in with Megan and Jace." And we just went, wow, I didn't realise it was going to be that easy. So, she was really supportive of it. And that's when we started setting things in motion, looked for a place, and it all kind of just came together from there relatively quickly.
It did.
Sorry, how long ago was that?
Just 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. And so did you discuss that decision to have her move in with your family, with the kid? I mean, obviously not the little kids, but the older kids?
We did, yeah. I mean, Levi was about 10 at that stage, 10 or 11, and they, it was just kind of accepted. It was, this is what's happening. And
I think it kind of sounded fun for everyone at first. It was like, wow, Oma's going to come and live with us. So I think it was a bit of an adventure. And I think we all, to a degree, kind of took it from that base of this is a new adventure for us as a family. We weren't thinking too much about the hard times. We were just trying to think about the happy stuff.
We didn't really know what to expect, to be honest.
No.
Yeah.
So it was, and that's probably the best way to approach something like this, I think, is to have a little bit of the blinkers on initially, and because you wouldn't be prepared for everything right up front. If someone said to you and unpacked everything that might unfold in the next couple of years, you would probably go like, oh, that's a bit scary. You got to learn gradually. I think as a carer, I think you need to kind of.
Well, it's like being a parent. Like you don't want to be told everything. And
if you wake up and you've got a 16-year-old, all of a sudden no baby, no child, like that would be relatively traumatic.
And Megan, I did want to ask, how has this all been for you? Because it's one thing to look after your own mother, but to have to, and I know you do a lot of caring for Oma, to do that for your mother-in-law. How is that sort of day to day? And you've got, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old in the mix as well. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I guess I sort of, I was a stepmom before I was my own mum, and now I'm a carer for Oma. So I sort of had a bit of a taste of, really spreading myself very far to care for people, I guess. But I feel like Oma gives so much back to the family in that, there's a lot of things that take up a lot of time caring for Oma, but then at the same time she gives so much back to the kids and us as a couple and us individually in, just being empathetic and being kind and being grateful and being patient and things like that. It's funny, like having the experience of being a stepmom first, I guess, like, and then having your own children. Like, there's a lot of things when it's your own kids you're quite forgiving of, but when you're a step parent, that kind of is there's quite a bigger disparity between the things that you're forgiving of. So I feel that with Oma, because she's not my mum, but yeah, it's just a real juggling act. So I definitely have this kind of because Oma's your mum, so you have that kind of unconditional, visceral, and I'm just like a tiny bit removed, but I think you just love her so much, and
which I think is traditional with in-law relations. Like you're never going to relate as closely to an in-law as you will to your own paternal birth parent.
Absolutely,
yeah. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. But I think she's so beautiful and lovely.
she is.
You just can't help but want to help her. And we have carers. Sometimes we'll get an odd carer that hasn't come in before just because of someone's sick or something, and they will come down and knock on the door and just say, "Oh my gosh, your mother-in-law is like the most beautiful." Like she really affects people. Like so you can't help but just want to just.
You can see it. She's so sweet.
Yeah.
Which I think is one thing to note. Like a lot of people, and we had a bit of feedback on this when we first started sharing our story online too, was, and I want to recognise the fact that everybody's dementia journey is different. And our dementia journey and our experience with Oma and her demeanour, we're very lucky that she's reasonably happy and doesn't get upset too much and is not angry.
Not aggressive.
Dementia.
She's anxious.
Yeah. However, just want to recognise the fact that that's not everybody's situation that they find themselves in with a loved one that's got dementia. There's a very vast range of experiences, and this whole experience would be very different if if Oma had severe bouts of anger issues to deal with, or complexity in her emotions.
Physical,
It's because she's quite level that this is doable for us.
That's fair.
And what other resources have you pulled on to help you with, be the best carer you can be? Are there like support groups, or do you have people that you talk to or can chat things out with?
Yeah, I mean, we've got my aged care that helps us with a lot of Oma's shopping and showering and things like that. So that takes a bit of weight off us, so that we can do more of the things that are meaningful, you know what I mean, rather than the practical things. But in terms of support groups, we haven't accessed those at all. And I think it's probably because we don't have a lot of time to, but...
Well, unknowingly, I think we've become a bit of a support group through our Facebook page for other people,
I think we've made sure that we've got... like we started this podcast a few weeks ago, and we feel like that actually provides us with the space as a couple to be able to reflect and have a bit of a chat, because those kind of things, just spending time as a couple and just being able to decompress... that doesn't happen very often. And we need my mum and dad. We lean on my mum and dad a lot to babysit Oma and babysit the kids at the same time. So Oma's very, very well connected with my mum and dad, but they live an hour and a half away. And but I think we make sure that even if we just have a date like outside by the pool with a plate of cheese, like we make sure that we kind of have time together, just so that we're connecting, decompressing.
It's pretty sad, Sarah. We get dressed up. We actually put a collared shirt on. You put on some nice shoes today. Bit of lippy. We go in the backyard and say, "Okay, we're on a date."
Well, one time last year, because we were lamenting so much about, no one can travel. And so one time last year, Jace actually threw up like a New York sky space on the skyline on the projector on the wall. And then we had like a glass of wine and a bowl of pasta.
And we pretended we're in a rooftop bar.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
We're commenting on the traffic. It was really sad. We said, "Oh, look at that." Yeah.
You have to get creative.
Yeah.
That's it.
I think so many people have. That's the thing we've, I think, experienced with the old life in lockdown with people, and people have found really inventive ways to cope and get by and make things work.
Yeah, definitely. Jason, I wanted to ask you, how are you coping with watching your mum change? Because I imagine it must be quite heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this is documented a lot in the film. That process of change that you can't really prepare for, and as much as you can kind of look at your loved one changing and evolving and slipping away, and I've described it before as losing her in little pieces every day. I think what we're experiencing now is sometimes we're losing her in big chunks in a day or in a week, and it's those little unknown things that become really complicated because you've got each other. Like, luckily, I've got Meg's and your parents, and we've got our immediate support circle. But a lot of the time, you're kind of just trying to figure stuff out yourself and trying to understand whether, a certain cognitive decline in a week is normal, or whether that's just an episode of Sundowner, or whether that's, something else that's changed her environment or her routine. And we had an incident recently where Oma ended up in hospital for a relatively simple procedure in her esophagus, but it necessitated a 36-hour hospital stay, and was it longer than that? Yeah. When we brought her back home again, she was just different, and different in a permanent way, not just in a like this is going to be a couple of days. It's been lasting, and that's that's a fair few weeks ago now that's happened. So things like that change the time demands, not just the emotional demands as trying to understand who this person now is and how they've changed, but the routines that she's missing, we have to pick up. So, and we've really felt that, and you in particular, because she basically lost her ability to cook her own meals when she came back from hospital, for two reasons. One, being away from the routine for a full night had a huge impact on her confidence. Her anxiety levels went up from the hospital stay, and then her diet needed to change when she got back. So she needed to go on a pureed food diet because of her esophagus issue. So all those things compacted just made things too hard for her to understand how to prep meals anymore. So as an example of how things can change quite quickly, that was one night in hospital. But the impact on us as a family has meant that every lunchtime, we need to manage the lunchtime soup process, sit down with her, manage her eating of that soup, and then dinner time process, Megan's got to prepare something for her for dinner that's different to our dinner. And then one of us needs to sit with her while she's eating that dinner and manage how fast or how slow she's eating it, and how completely she's finishing her meal. So it's and all that stuff takes time away from your kids. It takes time away from your work. It takes time away from your social set and probably your coping mechanisms that you've created to manage what you're doing. So it's that constant evolution, I guess, of that change, isn't it? And I do find I am getting a lot more teary at the moment. And I'm happy to put my hand up as a bloke and say that it's a very emotional time. It's because it is your mum, and it's very difficult to see them go down that path. And sometimes it's just little things that grab you unexpectedly. Like I know she's had trouble understanding who my father was recently, but at the moment he's kind of gone. And I'm just getting used to that idea of, well, he's now gone out of her memory bank. And I'm just waiting for that moment that I turn up and she's like, well, who are you? Are you a carer? Or are you I know that's going to happen. But I'm not quite happy. I'm not quite ready for that to happen next week, if you know what I mean. It's unusual when we talk about these things. We always they seem super scary, but then I think as you approach them, you kind of climatize. Get used to it. Get used to that as the new norm, and then you move on from that.
Actually, I saw that video that you put up of Oma when she came back from the hospital, was out of routine and pressing the buzzer because she wanted her dinner. And you're so patient with her. I mean, telling her 4 or 5 times the exact same thing, and you take your time and you're so detailed with what you tell her. That level of patience, that's not just for the camera, is it? I mean, what happens when the camera's not on? Are you always that patient?
Well, we try to be. But again, your patience levels vary depending on your stability on that day too. If...
And what else is going on in the past too.
If you've got a 2-year-old that's in the bath and you might not answer that doorbell the same way each time. And that's being human. That's understanding that being a carer is being human. And part of the reason I think we've been really passionate about sharing all sides of this story, not just the happy, clappy, fun moments, is to give an awareness for what the role of a carer is, both as a family carer and what professional carers out there in the environment are subject to every single day. And you guys know that only too well. It's to understand all sides of that and the edges of that, where that sits. And because we are human, our emotions will affect us in those things. But generally, we do try and be as patient as we can with her, because we're understanding that's not her choice to be where she's at.
Yeah.
And, there's Oma there. She's got a question. I'm going to let Megs jump up and get that one.
We need to model for the kids too. So.
Yeah, we do. We do need a model for the kids. We do need to make sure that we're showing them that this is worth doing and worth investing the time in and worth spending the headspace on as well. So, but that video you referred to, we got a very mixed response to that when we put that up. And it was the first time we actually ended up...
You mentioned that on your Facebook. Yeah. What was the negative feedback that you got to that video?
Well, a lot of the new feedback, so a lot of the new people that came across our story saw that particular video and then thought that I was being the opposite of patient, and that I was being quite condescending and controlling and monstrative almost of my interaction with Oma, which was hard that's hard to read, because you think, well, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to share this, to be open about this. But, on face value, when you look at that little video outside of seeing any of the other things we've done with Oma in video land, I can get it. I can understand how strangers come across our story as that piece is the first piece, would look at that and go, oh, you've been a bit rough, But that's why we started doing the podcast too, is to sort of have a longer conversation about these things. That's why this Lunchbox series is fantastic. To get out in the open about some of the nuances, some of the things that are a bit harder to explain in a short form. And, in the podcast that week, we spoke about why we have the language choices we do with Oma. She's used to being spoken to a certain way because of her ethnicity. So her Dutch culture, the Dutch are very direct in their conversation. Anyone that's got Dutch in their family or is a Dutch friend or cares for someone that's Dutch will understand. They're very, very direct in the way that they relate instructions and conversation. They can be super colourful with that as well, but there's a style to that vernacular. But aside from that too, I've got to repeat. I've got to talk with a certain volume in my voice because she's deaf in one ear. Yeah. And to a stranger that tunes in that video, they're like, "Why are you yelling at her?"
And she's lip reading a lot of the time as well. So you need to be able to enunciate so that she can try and hear, but lip read at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what things have you had to put in place in her home to keep her safe? I don't know if she's a wanderer, but you obviously would worry about her when at night or when you're not watching what she's doing. How have you had to adapt her space?
Horribly, we have had to lock her front door so that she's not a wanderer, but she's a falls risk of heading downstairs. And our driveway is a little bit steep, unfortunately, and the pavers are a little bit, skew-if, so there's a risk of falls. So it's kind of a payoff between, do we let her wander outside and sort of have a look at the garden and do some sweeping, and then inevitably she will fall over, or do we deal with the conversations about why am I locked in? Because if she does go to hospital, then we know, because she's had a fall, then we know the repercussions of that as well. So unfortunately we've had to do that. So there is a lot of questioning around that. And then there's a lot of signs. Yeah. Jason's very good at signs and pictures.
Although signs are having a changing effect at the moment because we're not reading as much as we used to.
Yeah, so you're drawing a lot. You're an amazing drawer. So Jason draws a lot, and she's taking the visuals from the drawings, which is helpful most of the time.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what we've experienced with her understanding her restrictions of her mobility too is where she can't really pick up on things by reading something. It's almost like letting her muscle memory in her body understand the new routine. So the way she moves around inside her apartment, inside her granny flat, there's a certain pattern that we've created to it because of her restrictions of movement, not being able to go out on her own. So, for instance, the doorbell, the reason we don't tell her not to use the doorbell just because we're recording this interview with you is because we don't want to break that routine with her, and then all of a sudden this afternoon she forgets to start pressing it because we told her to stop.
And then she'll use the internal stairs, and then we're going to
Yeah.
put a full risk.
So we want to keep the muscle memory of her going to that button, to push that button if she needs help. Even if she doesn't read the sign to say, if I need help, I need to push the button. It's the memory of my something tells me I've got a question and I should go here and do that. So it's sort of speaking to those sorts of things. And, you know, it's a constant process of adjustment. It's the same as, you know, she still has falls inside her granny flat. And, you know, once people are at falls risk, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to have falls. That's just going to happen. But you can go around inside a house and, you know, we all arrange the furniture in a certain way to help make that dining chair less trippable. So it's, we tuck it around on that side of the table, or, you know, she used to have a little dining table with 4 chairs in the set. It looked pretty, but it was like, well, 2 of those chairs are trip hazards, so we just took them out and only have 2 chairs there and have them tucked away on the other side of the table so they're not in her direct path of walking inside a house. But, you know, you can't put, you know, rubber corners on every bit of furniture. You can't.
You still got to live.
You got to live, and you got to still understand that it's a process. And yeah, we still have tumbles and falls, but they've at the moment, touch wood, far less dramatic than what they have been when she had open access to the door and she was going up and down the stairs herself and sweeping the driveway. And we still do those things, but we do those with her now.
Yeah. And we also, if we're going out, you know, if we're going to Bunnings or something and the whole family is going, we do bring a wheelchair because it just, and she hates it because she's like, I can walk. But it just means that she's managed. You know, if 1-year-old starts running down the paint aisle or something, like it's just a lot safer.
It's making sure we've got enough arms to look after everyone in the family when we go out. So the octopus, you know, got to hang on to everyone.
Well, we're coming up to the end of the half hour, but did you want to just end off by telling us a little bit about Omar before her memory started to go? Like, what was she like? What were her hobbies? What was her personality like? Paint a little picture of Omar before we got to meet her.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think she kind of had the same personality as why people love her now in a digital storytelling sense. She is just a beautiful, warm, smiley, quirky Dutch matriarch, you know. She obsessed with her garden, had the most beautiful blooming garden in the street. Everything was neat as a pin. There wasn't a dead flower on a single plant. Everything was manicured, gorgeous. As soon as a leaf fell on the lawn outside in the garden, she could hear it. Was out there and was gone. Like literally that pedantic.
She hates leaves.
She hates leaves even now. And admittedly, in our lifestyle, we're not quite that fussy about the leaves on the driveway, but it really irks Oma when she looks out the window. Again, one of those things we've got to understand is like, okay, we better go out and start doing the leaves. But you know, loved her handicraft, like crocheting. Was still interested in reading, would read books from the library, loved the cooking, loved all the motherly things that make someone such a beautiful, nurturing soul. And she was always a protector. She was a protector, a healer. She was that pinnacle in the family that everyone would go to when things weren't right. You just go to her. And I even remember as a kid, like, you know, when I was upset with someone, or, you know, when Dad was cranky, I'd just go running underneath Mum's legs, and I'd remember just the safety of her legs and standing underneath her legs and holding onto her legs, or going under, you know, getting tangled in a dress, and finding that space almost like my safe space, you know. And so I think it's a great honour that we can now kind of provide that safe space for her.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right, well, thank you guys. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to the next episode next week, where you can tell us more about how, you know, your decision on putting the videos on Facebook, and I guess the exciting journey of that all going viral, because it's all very exciting. And the podcast, you can tell us a bit more about that too.
Sure.
Thank you, Megan, too. Thank you for joining us today. I guess thank you to everyone else for joining us, and we hope you can join us next week. Keep the questions coming, and bye for now.